Okay, we're on the next chapter. I'm going to put you a little farther away. Chapter 26. Lucinda gasped. I gasped, too. She wasn't Lucinda. Or was she? The enormous eyes were the same, but not the height. The fairy was stooped with age, and her perfect skin was wrinkled, with a mole next to her nose. I was seeing the real Lucinda, unshielded by magic. Mandy, who is this? You brought a human spy on me. Mandy, who is this? You brought a human to spy on me. She straightened for a moment, and I saw a hint of the young, beautiful Lucinda. Then she sighed. You look familiar. Are you one of my victims? This was my chance. The chance for the freedom I always should have had. The chance to escape from my stepfamily. The chance to win Char back. But I was so nervous my voice was gone. I could only nod. What did I do to you, child? She whispered, as though afraid of my answer. I found my voice. You made me obedient. Now you know how it is. I do, child. She touched my cheek and my heart rose. But I can't help you. I renounced big magic. Oh, lady, I pleaded. It would be a wondrous gift. I would be so grateful. Ella, Mandy warned. Mandy, don't you think? Just this once? Lucinda shook her head, and the wispy gray hairs fluttered. No, I mustn't. But if you ever have need of small magic, call on me. You have only to say the words, Lucinda, come to my aid. She kissed my forehead. I remember you now. I thought you only spoke Aorthian. I begged her. I told her about my circumstances. I wept. She wept with me, sobbed harder than I did, but stood firm. I pleaded with Mandy to persuade her, but Mandy refused. I can't, lady, she said. It was big magic to cast the spell in the first place, but it would be big magic to undo it too. Who can guess what would come of it? Only good would come of it, only good. I can't bear this, Lucinda wailed, wringing her hands dramatically. I can't bear your distress. Farewell, child. She vanished. I stormed out of Mandy's room and rushed to the library, where I could be alone, where no one was likely to make me score anything or sew anything or say anything. Now I couldn't go to the balls. Hattie and Olive would go with Mom Olga. They'd be free to dance with Char, and so would every other young lady in Frau, and some lass would win him over. His nature was loving, and he'd find someone to love. As for me, I'd be lucky to glimpse him on the street. He wouldn't recognize me. My dirty servant's garb would rule out identification at a distance, and he'd never be close enough to see my face. I could neither go to the balls nor escape from them. Hattie and Mom Olga talked of nothing else. Even Olive was interested in the extent of worrying about her gown. Sew it with gold thread, she instructed her maid. Shouldn't I be as fine as Hattie? Shouldn't I be as fine as them both? I cooked and scrubbed and waited on them in a fury. For 2 weeks, I wouldn't speak to Mandy. The only sounds in the kitchen came from pots and pans as I slammed them down. Then it came to me. Why couldn't I go? Char needn't know I was there. Everyone would be masked at the beginning at least, although most would unmask quickly so he could admire their beauty. I never would. I'd see him, but he wouldn't see me. Where was the harm? If he didn't recognize me, I decided to do it. I would fill my eyes with him. If I could approach him safely, I'd fill my ears. If anyone questioned me, I wouldn't be Ella. I'd invent a new name. I'd be content in his presence, nothing more. I'd have to be careful of Hattie and Olive and Mum Olga. They probably wouldn't recognize me in a mask and an elegant gown, but I'd do well to keep away from them, especially from Hattie. I made up with Mandy and told her my plan. She didn't comment on the risk I'd be taking, only asked, Sweet, why go and break your heart again? My heart was still broken. I would see Char, and it would mend. I'd leave him, and it would break again. There were 3 balls. It would break 3 times. I had grown tall enough to wear mother's gowns. Mandy chose the best 3 and altered them in keeping with the current fashion, even adding a graceful train that would follow me everywhere. Small magic, she said. She also found the mask I'd worn at Father's wedding, white with tiny white beads along its edges. In the days preceding the ball, if there were moments when Char and the balls weren't in my mind, they were when I was asleep. Awake, I'd picture myself, radiantly beautiful, mounting the palace steps. I'd be late, and the whole court would be there already. An old servant would mutter, At last, a damsel worthy of our prince. People would turn to stare, and a sigh of envy or appreciation would rustle through the assembly. Char would hurry to... I wouldn't allow myself to see him. The old servant might approve me, and I would slip in unnoticed by anyone else. Within, noblemen in my proximity would beg me to dance. I'd oblige them, and the steps would carry me near Char. He'd see me and wonder who I was. After the dance, he'd attempt to find me, but I'd elude him. The next time he'd see me, I'd be in the arms of another partner. I'd smile at the stranger, and Char's heart would be touched. He'd My thoughts were nonsense. I would see Char and be invisible to him. Perhaps I'd see him fall in love with another maiden. At night, I searched my magic book for illustrations of Char, or anything written by him. But the book fell open onto pages written in Aorthian, written by Arita in her diary. I read eagerly. She wrote, "The inn has never had such important guests before. Prince Charmant and his knights stayed here last night. Mother was so nervous she backed into the trestle table while curtsying. It went over and Aunt Espy's vase smashed into 100 pieces. Mother, father, I, Ollie, Alunfa, Esti, and even Amete went down on our knees picking up shards so the prince wouldn't step on something sharp. It was so crowded on the floor I bumped into someone's shoulder. When I turned to apologize, I was face to face with the prince, who was crawling about with the rest of us. He insisted on paying for the vase. He said it never would have happened if not for him. Then he apologized for knocking into me. I couldn't answer him. No words would come. I could only nod and smile and hope he didn't seem too much of a bumpkin. Hoped I didn't seem too much of a bumpkin. At dinner, when I brought his ale, I did manage to speak, perhaps because I truly had a question, not simply to wish to impress. I told him I'd been at finishing school when Ella ran away and asked if he knew whether she was safe. When I said her name, one of the knights called out, "The ogre tamer, whatever happened to her?" The prince was quiet for so long after my question that I worried I had offended him, but when he spoke, he didn't seem angry. "You were her friend?" he asked. "You liked her?" I told him Ella was the best friend I ever had. He paused again, and I feared he would say she had died, but he finally answered that he believed her to be well and married to a rich gentleman. He added, "She is happy, I think. She is rich, so she is happy." Without thinking, I blurted, "Ella doesn't care about riches." Then I realized I'd contradicted a prince. "How do you know?" he said. I answered, "At school, everyone hated me because I wasn't wealthy and because I spoke with an accent. She was the only one who was kind." "Perhaps she's changed," he said. "I don't think so, Your Highness," contradicted him twice. It was the end of our conversation, and I shall remember it forever. I watched him all evening, before and after we talked. Before, he had talked and joked with his men. After, he spoke no more. Married? How could that be? I wish I could see her again. I wished I could see Arita. I wished I could have seen Char's face when she defended me, but no illustrations accompanied her journal. December 12th, the day of the first ball, dawned clear and mild, but by noon clouds had gathered and the wind had become sharp and cold. My gowns hung in Mandy's wardrobe. The glass slippers Char and I found were safely buried in the bottom of my carpet bag. Since they'd been hidden under my petticoats, there was little likelihood that Char would see and identify them. Hattie's preparations began after breakfast and continued endlessly. "It's not tight enough. Ella, pull harder." "Will that do?" My fingers were striped red and white from tugging at her laces. If she could still breathe, I wasn't to blame. "Let me see." She curtsied at herself in the mirror and rose, panting and smiling. "I shall be desolate if you don't remember me, Prince," she cooed at her reflection. Then she spoke over her shoulder. "Am I not magnificent, Ella? Don't you wish you could look as I do and go to the ball?" "Magnificent, ravishing, yes, I wish I could." Anything to make her go. "Pearls would set my hair off to advantage. Fetch them, there's a good girl." 2 hours later, Mom Olga called her 3 times and threatened to leave without her. She declared herself perfect and departed. At last, I was free to bathe and dress. Instead of the kitchen soap I usually used, I helped myself to Hattie's store of bath oils and fragrant soaps. Mandy produced a fleecy towel and a fine scrub brush. "Tonight, I'll be your lady-in-waiting," she said, pouring steaming water into the tub. "When your servant is your fairy godmother, you're never scolded, and your water never gets cold. You become sparkling clean, but the water never gets dirty." I soaked away a year of cinders and grime, and Mom Olga's orders and Hattie's edicts and Olive's demands. When I rose from the bath and stepped into the robe Mandy held for me, I was no longer a scullery maid, but the equal of anyone at Char's ball. My gown was a spring green embroidered with leaves of darker green and plump yellow buds. Mandy had done her work well. In accordance with the latest fashion, my waist tapered to a narrow point, and my train trailed 2 feet behind me. In the glass, I saw Mandy curtsy. "You're lovely, lady." She seemed close to tears. I hugged her. She squeezed me tight, and I inhaled the sweet smell of freshly baked bread. I turned back to the glass and raised my mask, which covered most of my forehead and half of my cheeks, with small holes for my eyes. With half of my head hidden, my mouth appeared strange and unknown, even to me. The transformation was thorough. With the mask, I was not Ella. Nor was I perfectly dressed. I had no jewels. My throat was unfashionably bare, but it would have to do. I didn't have to be the most elegant creature at the ball. I only had to see Char. When I ran down to our front door, I discovered the icy rain was falling in sheets. If I walked the quarter mile to the castle, I would be soaked. I could go to the ball without Jules, but not wet through and shivering. Mandy, what can I do? Oh, sweet. You can stay home. I knew there would be 2 more balls and that it probably wouldn't sleet tomorrow, but it might. And I had set my heart on going tonight. Isn't there some small magic, a fairy umbrella, something that could keep me dry? No, love, not small magic. The weather was such a stupid thing to separate me from Char. Mandy hadn't made the rain, but she could have ended it. I wish you were a real fairy, one who wasn't afraid to do anything. I had a mad idea and I acted on it without considering its wisdom. I said the words Lucinda had taught me. Lucinda, come to my aid. If anyone would keep thinking keeping me dry wasn't bad magic, that would be Lucinda. Ella, Mandy protested. Don't. The order came too late. Lucinda appeared between us. She still looked old, but she stood straighter than the last time I'd seen her, and many of her wrinkles had disappeared. A sweet child, you need my help? She smiled, and the young Lucinda shone through. So long as it's not too big, I shall do what I can. I explained. Going to a ball like that? No, it won't do. She touched my neck, and it was hung so heavy with jewels that I took all my finishing school training to keep my head up. Mandy snorted. Perhaps it's too much for small magic. Lucinda agreed. The weight vanished, replaced by a thin silver chain from which hung a white lily made of the same kind of glass as my slippers. I felt a slight pressure on my head and lifted off a tiara fashioned as a garland of the same flowers. It's beautiful. Lucinda replaced it on my hair. Now, you need a coach. That shouldn't be too troublesome. How can you call a coach small magic? Mandy demanded. And horses and a coachman and footman, people and animals, you've forgotten your lesson. No, I haven't. I won't shape them from the air. I'll form them out of real things. That should satisfy your scruples, Mandy dear. Mandy grunted, which I knew was not agreement, but Lucinda continued gaily. Earlier this evening in Frel, I spied a giant's cart filled with pumpkins. An orange coach would be splendid. A rumbling noise reached us. Outside, a mass darker than the storm took shape and grew larger. A 7-foot-high pumpkin rolled toward us and came to rest in the street outside of the manor. I watched Lucinda. She muttered no incantations, waved no wand. For a moment her gaze shifted and she seemed to stare within, not out. Then she winked at me. Look, child. The pumpkin had been transformed into a gleaming coach with brass door handles and windows through which lacy curtains peeked. Mice will make plump horses, she said. 6 fat brown mice raced across the tiles of the hall. They vanished, and 6 horses appeared before the coach. A white rat became the coachman, and 6 lizards were transformed into footmen. They're wonderful, I said. Thank you. She beamed. Mandy glowered. Anything can happen, you idiot. What can happen? And I'll make it safer. Ella, child, you'll have to leave the ball early. At midnight, your coach will become a pumpkin again, and the animals will regain their original shape until your next ball. The tiara and necklace will disappear. I would have only 3 hours with Char. They would have to be enough. How glorious to be young and going to a ball. Lucinda vanished. Glorious, yes, see Char, nothing more. Goodbye, Mandy, I said. Wait. She ran to the kitchen. I stood impatiently and gazed outside. As I watched, an orange carpet unfurled itself and rolled from the coach's door to ours. If I waited much longer, it would be wet and useless. Mandy returned with her umbrella, uncompromisingly black, and with 2 bent spokes. Here, love. I hope you won't be sorry. I won't hug you and muss your dress. She kissed me. Go now. I stepped onto the carpet and raised the umbrella. The coachman jumped down from his perch and opened the carriage door. This is one part that I feel like we miss quite a bit in the Ella Enchanted movie, is that she never really feels like Cinderella. You don't have the coach, you don't have the fairy godmother as much. Like, you have Lucinda, the bad one, but you don't have, like, excuse me, I burped. You don't have, like, all of the classic Cinderella tropes, but you do in this book. And so I do, especially reading it this second time, I actually quite enjoy the book better. Okay, I'm going to see if I can finish this book just all right now. But we are on chapter 27. A few guests were still arriving when my carriage reached the castle. Before I emerged, I made certain my mask was securely tied. I had been here before, as a week-old infant brought to meet my sovereign, but not since. The hall was twice as tall as Mum Olga's. Every wall was covered with tapestries, hunting scenes, court scenes, pastoral scenes. All the walls to my right and to my left, along the walls to my right and to my left, a line of marble pillars marched to the end of the hall. I tried not to gape. Soon, I'd be counting windows. "Mistress," a young squire offered me a glass of wine. It was delightful not to be a servant. "The prince is greeting his guests. There is the queue." He waved at the file of courtiers, mostly women, that wound from the huge double doors to the prince, a small figure at the far reach of the hall. Most of the women had already unmasked, so Char would be sure to see their lovely eyes and classical noses. The squire added, "They're each scheming to make the prince propose marriage on the spot." He bowed. "Dance with me, lady. The line will wait." In order, a group of musicians played near the prince, and perhaps a dozen guests danced. "With pleasure," I said, pitching my voice a tone lower than usual. "With pleasure." My eyes kept straying from my partner. Char smiled at each guest, bowed, nodded, spoke. Once he laughed. Making him laugh had been my domain. The damsel who caused the laughter was of middle height, slender, with blonde, wavy hair cascading to her waist. She had removed her mask, but her back was turned so I couldn't see her face. Hattie and Olive and Mum Olga were in line. They were probably off eating somewhere, but Hattie would certainly return soon. She wouldn't leave a room for long while Char occupied it. My dance ended as the clock struck the quarter before 10. "Thank you," I said. "No squire can hold a lady's attention tonight." He left me. Just over 2 hours remained. I retired to a chair at the edge of the hall, as close to Char as I dared. 3 gentlemen asked me to dance, but I declined each invitation. I became simply a pair of eyes staring through my mask at Char. I needed no ears because I was too far off to hear his voice. No words because I was too distant for speech. And no thoughts, those I saved for later. He bent his head. I loved the hairs on the nape of his neck. He moved his lips. I admired their changing shape. He clasped a hand. I blessed his fingers. Once, the power of my gaze drew his eyes. I looked away quickly and noticed Hattie, hovering a few feet beyond the line, her lips clenched in a fawning smile. He spoke to the last guest, last but one. My resolution to be unseen gave way. The last in line would be me. I rose and hurried to reach him before Hattie could pounce. I curtsied. He bowed. When we both straightened, I found I had grown closer to his height. "What is your name, lady?" He smiled politely. I found my voice with difficulty. "Leela." We were silent. "Do you live here in Frel, Lady Leela?" "In Bast, Highness." I named a town near the Elves' Forest. He looked past me, ready to move on. "I hope you enjoy the ball on your stay in Frel." I couldn't let go of him. "Abensa odu, enset ima esta ada ubuf." I spoke with a heavy Kirin accent. "You speak Aorthian?" His attention was captured. "Not well. My uncle was born there. He's a singer. His voice can charm wood." Char's smile was genuine now. "I miss their songs. I was glad to leave, but now I miss everything." I hummed a stanza of Arita's favorite song, a sad one, about a farmer whose family is starving. Char joined me, singing softly. Near us, heads turned. I saw Hattie frown with her smile still frozen in place. When we finished, he bowed again. "Would you favor me with a dance?" Over all the others, I was his choice. I curtsied, and he took my hand. Our hands knew each other. Char looked at me, startled. "Have we met before, lady?" "I've never left Bast, but I've longed to see Frelf my whole life." He nodded. The clock struck 11. The dance was a gavant, too spirited for talk. Rapid movement was a relief in the midst of so much feeling. We flew through the hall, perfectly in step. Char smiled at me. I smiled back, happy. We separated. I twined arms with a succession of momentary partners, dukes, earls, knights, squires, and back to Char. A final whirl, and the dance ended. "I love a gavant," I said, touching to make sure my mask was still properly in place. "The rush, the sweep, the whoosh." What nonsense was I talking? "It's the same with stair rails." "The same feeling," he said. Do you like to glide? Do you like to slide?" His voice was eager. Stair rails. Did he suspect me? I forced a sigh. "No, Majesty, I'm afraid of heights." "Oh." His polite tone had returned. "Do you?" "Do I what?" "Like to slide down stair rails." "Oh, yes, I used to." "I wish I could enjoy it. This fear of heights is an affliction." He nodded, a show of sympathy, but not much interest. I was losing him. "Especially," I added, "as I've grown taller." He stared. Then he laughed in surprised delight. I was a fool for behaving so much like myself. The clock struck the half hour. Char started. 11:30. "I've neglected my guests." He became the courteous host again. "Refreshments are in the next room, if you care to partake of them." He waved at an archway, then, "I'll look for you later." He hoped to see me again. Leela, that is. I hurried out of the hall. Outside, the sleet had stopped. The pumpkin coach glistened in a line of black carriages. I climbed in. When we arrived at home, the coachman handed me out, remounted, and flicked his whip. The horses started off. In the morning, Hattie told me about her share in the ball, bidding me to sit on a low stool while the family ate their breakfast. "He danced with me," Hattie said, her teeth stained purple from a blueberry muffin, "and only good manners prevented him from spending the rest of the evening at my side." "When will you pay me?" Olive asked. "Must I pay? Aren't you glad you danced with the prince? You said you'd give me 3 coins for every time he couldn't dance with anyone else because of me. You owe me," she thought, 8 coins. "How many times did he dance with you?" I asked. 3 times. I asked him 4, but the last time he said he had to go see other guests. I vowed not to approach Char during the second ball. It was too dangerous. The evening was clear, but Lucinda provided the coach anyway. My tiara and pendant were pink roses. My gown was a silvery blue with a pale purple petticoat. Tonight, there was no receiving line. I searched for a seat where I'd had a clear view of the dance and where others would have a poor view of me. I found one in a recess partially blocked by a giant fern in a stone pot. I scrutinized Char's dancing partners, although I knew I had no right to resent a rival. He danced 3 times with the yellow-haired wench who'd made him laugh the night before. She wore no mask and was lovely. I couldn't leave him to her. The clock struck the half-hour. Soon it would be 11. I checked my mask, then left my hiding place and stood with the others who observed the dance. Char saw me. Over the shoulder of his partner, he mouthed, "Wait for me." I grew roots. An earthquake could not have moved me. The clock struck 11:15. It struck 11. If it had struck the end of the world, I'd have stayed as I was. The final figure ended, and he came to me. "Will you dance?" he asked. "I looked for you." Did I have time? I accepted his arm, and we stepped into the dance, a slow saraband. "I was here all the while. I watched you." "What did you see?" An excellent host who had little real enjoyment in the ball, except when he danced with the blonde beauty. Was it so apparent? It was to me. He changed the subject. "Will you be here tomorrow? My father has asked me to perform an Aorthian song." "When will you sing?" "Before midnight, please." "Sometime late," he grinned. "If I'm lucky, many of the guests will have gone. They needn't all hear their future ruler disgrace himself." "There will be no disgrace, if you were taught in Aorthia." "What will you sing?" "A homecoming song." He sang in my ear. "Oak, granite, lilies by the road, remember me, I remember you. Clouds brushing, clover hills, remember me. Sister child grown tall, remember me, I remember you." The dance ended and he stopped. "There's more. I want you to hear it. Will you?" I resolved to stay late the next night. I'd managed to reach home without Lucinda's gifts, even if I had to swim. "I'll be delighted to, but I must leave now tonight. I'm expected by 12. He chose. How close to midnight was it now? He would think it odd if my jewelry vanished. "Oh, I'm sorry, I mustn't." He bowed. I curtsied. "Till tomorrow, Majesty." "One last thing." He caught my hand. "Please, call me Char." Another thing that I really like about the book is that he falls in love with Ella, right? But then after, she kind of spurns him, he falls in love with her again, not knowing it's her. And I love that because they're kind of still compatible, even though they're not around each other. And I really like that.